Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about a massive shift in how businesses operate, how cybersecurity has transformed from, a simple digital guard dog into a really critical part of the core business strategy. Let's dive in.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to look at how the entire security landscape has just been completely redrawn. Back in the day, it was simple, right? You were just protecting the castle, your internal servers. But now, that castle is gone. The battlefield is literally everywhere. It's the smartphone in your pocket, it's the IoT devices in your office, it's even the industrial controls on a factory floor. And maybe most importantly, the new front line is us. It's people, with phishing being the #1 weapon of choice. So, because this battlefield is everywhere now, the whole job of a security professional has had to change in a pretty fundamental way. It's about so much more than just keeping data safe. This new reality means that security's job description has just exploded. We're not just talking about bits and bytes anymore. We're talking about protecting the whole organization, its people, its hardware and software, the intellectual property that gives the company its competitive edge, and ultimately, the company's hard-earned reputation. And this all leads to a really crucial shift in mindset. We have to stop thinking about security as just another expense, a line item on a budget that you try to shrink. In today's world, strong security is a genuine strategic advantage. It's what builds the trust and resilience you need to actually go out and hit your business goals. It's a true business enabler. So, with this new, way more complex landscape, how does any organization even begin to protect itself? Well, it all starts with a few foundational principles. This is the absolute bedrock of any good security program. Let's kick things off with the one you're probably most familiar with: confidentiality. At its heart, this is all about keeping secrets secret. The goal is simple: make sure only the right people can access sensitive information. Things like encryption and access controls are basically the digital locks and keys that make this happen. Then we have integrity, which is all about trust. How do you know that the report you're looking at is the real deal and hasn't been secretly altered? Well, integrity gives you that guarantee. It uses tools like digital signatures to verify that your information is authentic and hasn't been tampered with. And rounding out the classic trio is availability. This one's super straightforward, but absolutely critical. Can you actually get to your systems and data when you need them? This is why we have backups, redundant systems, and solid disaster recovery plans, so the business can keep running no matter what happens. Now, for years and years, those three principles, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, often called the CI Triad, they were the pillars of cybersecurity. But in the incredibly complex, interconnected world we live in now, that's just not the whole story anymore. The framework had to evolve. We now also need authenticity. This principle answers the critical question, are you really who you claim to be? It's all about verifying the true source of information or a user's identity, often using things like digital certificates to prove it. And finally, there's nonrepudiation. This sounds a little technical, but it's basically the principle of irrefutable proof. It makes sure that someone can't take an action, like, say, authorize a huge financial transfer, and then later deny they ever did it. Digital signatures and detailed logs create an audit trail that's basically unbreakable. So, we have all these principles. How do we actually apply them in the real world? Well, it all starts with having a super clear understanding of who's in charge. And to do that, we need to define a few key terms. First up, let's get this straight. Governance versus management. Think about it this way. Governance is the what. It's the senior leaders setting the big picture strategy and approving the high-level rules. Management, on the other hand, is the how. They're the ones on the ground actually implementing all the controls to make that strategy a reality. And that brings us to another super important distinction that trips people up all the time: accountability versus responsibility. Accountability is about ultimate ownership. The buck stops here, and you can't pass it off. A senior executive might be accountable for data security. Responsibility, though, that's about doing the work, the day-to-day tasks, and that can be delegated to the team on the front lines. Okay, so with clear principles and well-defined roles, security really becomes a strategic game of managing risk. And this isn't some one-time fix, it's a continuous, repeating cycle of making smart decisions. And that cycle follows a pretty clear 5-step process. First, you identify potential risks, what could go wrong. Then, you analyze them to figure out how likely they are and how bad the impact would be. Based on that, you prioritize them, because you can't fix everything at once. Next, you decide how to treat the risk. And finally, and this part is key, you constantly monitor what you've done and review the whole process.
And this really highlights the most important point here. Risk management is not a project with a start and an end date. It is not a checklist you just tick off and then file away. It's a continuous cycle of improvement, a living, breathing process that has to adapt to new threats all the time.
Once you got a risk prioritized, an organization basically has 4 main moves it can make. You can try to avoid the risk by just not doing the risky activity. You can transfer it, which is often what you do when you buy cyber insurance. You can mitigate it, which means putting security controls in place to make it less likely or less damaging. Or sometimes you just accept it, if the risk is small enough to live with.
So how does all of this theory, the principles, the roles, the risk strategies, how does it all come together in the real world? Well, it gets organized and written down in a structured security playbook. At the very top of that playbook is the policy. This is the high-level, strategic document that gets approved by the top executives. It sets the company's whole philosophy on security and lays down the fundamental rules of the road. It answers the why and the what. Supporting that high-level policy, you have standards. These are the mandatory, specific rules that make the policy real. So if the policy says, we will protect our data, the standard is the thing that says all passwords must be a minimum of 12 characters. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Next up, you've got procedures. This is the how-to guide. These are the really detailed, step-by-step instructions that people follow to do a specific task correctly and securely every single time.
And finally, we have guidelines. Now, unlike standards, these are not mandatory. Think of them as recommended best practices or pro tips. They offer helpful advice and suggestions, but they allow professionals to use their judgment to handle unique situations.
So, we end up right back where we started, with a really fundamental question for every single modern business out there. In a world that runs on data and trust, is cybersecurity just a cost center, something to be managed and minimized, or is it your most valuable strategic partner, the very thing that enables your success? That's a question every leader needs to answer. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.